Hello, my name is Daryl Abbs, and I'm with Watson and Associates Economists Limited. I am a managing partner at the firm. I will be running through a presentation, a little slideshow, which sets out the analysis presented in the 8th Concession Road area capital charges reports for this information session. A brief agenda of the discussion topics in this presentation. So we'll start with a background on why we are looking at capital charges in this area. I will provide a brief summary of the legislative framework. I'll provide a description of the service area, the anticipated capital costs to service the Oldcastle Hamlet, a calculation of that capital charge that we're looking at, discuss some special considerations, and then run through some frequently asked questions and responses. I'll finalize with next steps and the implementation steps. So brief history on the background. Why are we looking at charges in this area? So traditionally, a number of properties in the Oldcastle Hamlet have been serviced with private on-site systems. Many of these were inadequate or malfunctioning and created surface water pollution and created some issues. As such, the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change required the town to come up with a plan on how to address these issues. The town and ministry identified the need for proper treatment of wastewater in the hamlet. And then some studies and policies were undertaken, and a preferred strategy was identified through the 2018 Oldcastle Hamlet Sanitary Servicing 8th Concession Road Trunk Sanitary Sewer Outlet Preliminary Design Report. This report outlined trunk and local sewer projects that are required to service this area, along with the cost estimates. These cost estimates were then subsequently updated in 2020 and 2022 to reflect current costs. Now, new development in the area, in the Oldcastle area, they will pay their fair share of the sanitary servicing through development charges. And so the town imposes development charges, so these capital costs for growth-related infrastructure. So infrastructure that's required to support new development in the town. The municipality or the town has imposed these charges through a bylaw under the Development Charges Act. Okay, so as new development proceeds, they build their structures, build their homes, build their non-residential buildings, they will pay development charges towards this wastewater infrastructure. The non-growth related component of the works, or the share of the sewers that will benefit the existing community, the existing properties, that would be recovered through a capital charge, which would be imposed under Part 12 of the Municipal Act. So as such, the town retained my firm, Watson and Associates Economists Limited, to undertake the calculation of these capital charges through this study process. So for the legislative framework, again, I mentioned these capital charges can be imposed under Part 12 of the Municipal Act. And so this section, which starts at Section 391 of the Municipal Act, provides municipalities broad powers to impose fees and charges. And so through this section, the town is able to impose capital charges to recover the costs of the sanitary infrastructure. So it is proposed that the existing properties in this area will pay the non-growth related costs of the infrastructure through these capital charges, and new development will pay their share of the capital costs through development charges. So if we take a look at the servicing area, you can see at the bottom of the map here, outlined and highlighted in pink, is the servicing area. What you'll see is that red line, dotted line with the arrow going north shows the 8th concession sanitary outlet going through the city of Windsor, and all of the wastewater is proposed to outlet at the Little River Pollution Control Plant. So if we zoom in on the service area, we zoom in on the hamlet. What we've outlined in the pink is the servicing area. So these area that will be serviced with the new infrastructure. And so if we're looking at the total number of properties, there's about 94 existing residential properties, 226 existing non-residential properties, for a total of about 320 existing properties. There's about 20 new residential properties, 49 new non-residential properties, for a total of 69 new properties. When we're looking at the area of these properties, you'll see in hectares, there's about 224.1 hectares of existing properties and 402.2 hectares of new property. Okay, you can see that although there's less new properties are bigger, as these are developing properties that will be subdivided and developed upon. So the methodology we utilized in calculating these capital charges is a single detached equivalent method. And so what we wanted to do was normalize the calculations and say, well, how many single detached equivalent units worth of flow does each property require? And so a property with one single detached home would be one single detached equivalent. Okay. And so as an example, we provided down below here one of the properties, a business park. And so what we've done to identify, well, how many single detached equivalent homes worth of flow does this property actually require? And so if we take a look at the population density assumptions, so the engineers assumed a density of about 35 persons per hectare. The property size is 0.52 hectares. So the assumed population or equivalent population of flow needed for this area is 18.2 people. If a single detached home, and based on the assumptions we've utilized in other documents, the 2019 development charge background study, there's about 3.2 people for every single detached home. So if we multiply the 18.2, or if we divide the 18.2 divided by the 3.2, what that says is this property needs about 5.7 single detached equivalent worth of homes worth of flow. Okay. So if we're looking at the number of single detached equivalent homes we have in the study area, there's about 2,122 existing single detached equivalent homes and about 4,604 new single detached equivalent homes. I'll show you in the next couple slides, but the total existing single detached equivalents are what will be used as the denominator in our calculations for this Part 12 charge. The numerator is going to be the capital costs. Okay, so we'll take the total capital costs to be recovered from the charges divided by the total number of single detached equivalent homes to come up with a charge per single detached equivalent home. So when we're looking at the infrastructure is broken down into 3 components. And so there's a main charge or a trunk charge. And this relates to sanitary sewers that are greater than 375 millimeters in diameter, so larger pipes. As well, pump stations and force mains required for this area. There's a local charge, which are smaller order sewers, so sewers that are 375 millimeters in size, or sorry, less than 375 millimeters in size. And then as well, there's a lateral charge, and this lateral is what's required to connect the sewer to the property. And again, I'll show you in a minute, but just wanted to provide a map which highlights all of the existing properties. And again, those total existing properties amount to 2,122 single detached equivalents of flow. When we're looking at the local infrastructure, so these are the smaller order mains. We'll note there are some areas which might be considered developing properties or new properties that would pay a development charge. They typically install their own local sewer mains, so their local infrastructure. However, some of these new properties are located in an area where the town would be providing the existing residents with the local sewers. So we've included these properties in this Part 12 capital charge, and so they will pay on top of development charges, they will also pay this Part 12 capital charge. And so in total, there's 3,027 single detached equivalent units that will pay this local infrastructure charge. So when we're looking at the total cost of the trunk sewers, there's about $63.5 million. The town share of that cost is about $26.43 million. And so if we take that cost and we look at how much of that the infrastructure is related to new development or growth related and can be funded with development charges, it's about 21.37 million. The non-growth related component, which would be funded with the Part 12 capital charges we're talking about, is only 4.79 million. For the local sewers, these are sewers that are required for the existing, as well as some of the few of the new developing lands. So the total cost here is $14.76 million. The town share is $14.76 million, the total. And all of that cost is anticipated to be funded through these Part 12 capital charges. In addition to those charges, I mentioned there's lateral capital costs, and these are assessed based on the specific property and the type of lateral that's required to connect the sewer to your property. They range from a low of just under $4,000 up to $14,306, depending on the type of lateral required. And so in terms of the calculation of the charges, again, we're taking for the main charge, we're looking at that $4.79 million. We're dividing it by the 2,122 SDEs to come up with a main charge per single detached equivalent unit of $2,255. For the local charge, again, we're collecting the 14.76 million, dividing it by the 3,027 single detached equivalent units to come up with $4,876 per single detached equivalent unit. So in total, that's $7,131 per single detached equivalent unit, in addition to the required lateral charge, which is identified here. Again, either $3,974 at the lowest end, up to $14,300 at the high end. So there are some special considerations, properties that are not subject to the charge. So if your property is already serviced with sanitary sewers, with municipal servicing, and there are some properties to the east that are already serviced through a temporary solution, they would not pay these capital charges as they're already serviced with sewers. There are some frozen areas, so a number of properties that are fully or partially frozen. An example of a property that's partially frozen would be a cemetery. There's no intent to construct on the cemetery lands. And the servicing is really only required for the main building. And so the rest of the property is not considered in the calculations, just the main building. And then as well, any share of the growth related costs, as I mentioned, they will be funded with development charges. Now on to some frequently asked questions, along with some responses to these frequently asked questions. So question one, why are sanitary sewers needed? So as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, historically, properties within the Old Castle Hamlet area were serviced with private septic systems. In the late 2000s, the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change received a number of complaints regarding the sewage effluents from failing systems. And so as part of this, the ministry required or requested a plan from the town on how they would address these issues. So the town came up with a plan, and the plan was accepted by the ministry. And this plan was to install sanitary sewers over time on a yearly basis. One thing to note is that if the ministry wasn't satisfied with the town's plan, that the ministry could issue a provincial officer's order under the Water Resources Act to address the sewage effluent. So if the ministry wasn't happy with the town's plan, the ministry could essentially order the town to undertake these works or a similar plan to address the sewage effluent. Okay. There have been numerous studies and policies prepared to date since the identification of these issues in the early 2000s with respect to servicing this area with wastewater. So what is the timing for the installation of sewers and for the assessments? So the timing for the sewers, so installation of sewers within the area is really subject to available funding, staffing resources, and council approval. The tentative schedule identified at the beginning was based on a 30-year program, assuming one phase of sewers per year. To date, the town has installed 10 of the possible 30 phases. With respect to the timing of assessments, the assessments will be mailed out to the affected properties within the hamlet, the servicing area, once the sanitary service connection has been provided to the property line, generally within a few months of completion of construction. So the costs are too high, and I can't afford the assessment. So the calculated assessments are based on the actual cost of the infrastructure incurred to date, as well as the estimated construction costs for future phases. So the total project costs of everything was approximately $81.46 million. $25.5 million was identified in grant funding. So this is from upper levels of government. $11.5 million it will be funded by the city of Windsor, and $21.4 million will be funded by the town through development charges. So new development would actually pay that $21.4 million as they construct and pay their development charges. So about 72% of the total cost of this infrastructure will be funded through either grant funding, the city of Windsor, or through development charges. Okay, so the remaining 28% would be funded through these capital charges through Part 12 of the Municipal Act. So the town will offer debentures for the residents over 10 or 20-year terms. These will be offered through the Ontario Infrastructure and Lands Corporation, so OILC. The annual payments will include interest at a rate that will be set when the debenture is obtained. So just for example purposes, we provided two examples. So if your assessment, the charges that you would have to pay would be $50,000 over a 10-year period at 4% interest rates, this would equate to about $6,165 per year. If you had an assessment of $50,000 and you paid over 20 years at 4% interest, this would amount to about $3,679 per year. Okay. Another question, the city of Windsor received grants. Why not the town of Tecumseh? And so through the wastewater agreement between the city and the town, which is outlined in bylaw 2004-70, this outlines the cost sharing percentages for each of the phases of the trunk sanitary sewer through the city of Windsor. So in 2009, the city was successful in receiving grant funding from upper levels of government, but this benefited both the city and the town. And as an example, as shown below, what was identified initially was a total of $42.2 million. So with grants, just over 21 million was provided in federal and provincial grants. That left 11.5 million to be funded by the city of Windsor, 9.6 million to be funded by the town of Tecumseh. Without grants, this amount would be almost double for the town of Tecumseh. So those grants did in fact benefit the town. So do all of the properties within the sanitary service area pay into the sewers? And the short answer is yes. So all properties in the area will pay for the use of the sewers. So the existing properties, they will pay their Part 12 capital charges, both the main and the lateral charges. So for the main charges, there's the trunk component or the main component, as well as the local component. For new development, they will pay for their share of the sewers through development charges. As well, they will connect to the existing infrastructure or the new infrastructure at their own cost through local services. So they will install their own local services. Now, there are a couple growth properties or new developing properties that will also pay that Part 12 capital charge for their local services component. So as an example, here's 4 different scenarios. And so the first picture on the left, we have an existing property. And so they would pay the main charge, so their trunk and the local charge, as well as the lateral connection fee. The second picture shows an existing structure, as well as an area to be developed at a later date. And so for that existing structure and area, they would pay the main charge, the trunk and the local, as well as the lateral connection. But for that developing area, if they were to develop that, they would pay development charges for that growth property. The third picture from the left shows a vacant property slated for future development. And so they would pay for their share of the sewers through development charges, the growth-related component, as well as the installation of their own local services, their own local sewers. Okay. And lastly, you can see the picture on the far right. This is a case where there's a new development property, a vacant property, where they would pay development charges when they build their structure. But as well, they're going to pay their Part 12 charge for this property, as the town would be installing the local sewers along this road. So question 6, all properties should be charged in a fair manner. And so when identifying the infrastructure requirements and the capital needs to service this area, The engineers used a flow per hectare approach to identify how much flow is required for each of the different types of properties, residential, commercial, industrial, etc., to determine the sizing of the infrastructure required. And so since the infrastructure was identified on a flow basis for each property, the single detached equivalent approach that we discussed earlier in the presentation does provide the most equitable apportionment of costs. So since each property is assigned a number of single detached equivalent units based on the assumed flow for that property, that does equate back to how the engineers designed or identified the need for the infrastructure for this area. So will my basement flood once I connect to the sanitary sewers? So water can enter into basements in several different ways and for many reasons, and is most likely to occur during periods of heavy rainfall. So backup of wastewater in the sanitary sewer system, which could be a combination of wastewater as well as rainwater, is one of the most damaging ways that flooding of a basement can occur. Unwanted rainwater can enter into the sanitary sewer system in various ways. So in 2014, the town implemented a new standard for new residential subdivisions that all plumbing fixtures in basements must be drained via a sewage ejector pump to the sanitary building sewer. All fixtures on the first floor level and above may be drained by gravity pipes to the building sewer. This system virtually ensures that basement flooding will not occur from surcharging of the town's sanitary sewer system. So residential houses constructed with septic systems will typically have their sanitary building sewer exiting the basement wall above the basement floor. And you can see this in the diagram to the right. This requires any basement fixtures to be drained via sewage ejector pump, which hydraulically separates the basement from the building sewer. This is the exact situation the town is now requesting in all new residential subdivisions to eliminate the risk of basement flooding from surcharging sanitary sewers. So I recently installed a new septic system and wasn't informed by the town on the timing of sanitary sewers. So when a building permit application is received from a property located within the hamlet, within the servicing area, the building department will review whether there are existing sewers available, and if not, they will consult Public Works and Engineering Services on what is proposed within the 5-year capital works plan. If the sanitary sewers are proposed within the next 1 to 3 years, the building department may choose to permit a temporary solution, i.e. a holding tank, to allow the property owner to forego the expense of a full septic system until the infrastructure is put in place and municipal servicing is provided. Although the town may have a tentative servicing schedule for the old castle hamlet, it is, again, subject to available funding, staffing resources, council approval, and subject to ongoing revisions. So question 9, can council decline to pass the bylaw? And if so, what are the implications? So this would be inconsistent with past practice and policy in the town. Historically, where there is a derived benefit from major capital infrastructure to property, the project has been subject to full cost recovery against the benefiting landowners. To date, over 50% of the total project cost has been constructed. The town's share has been funded through debt, sanitary sewer reserve funds, and rate charges. Without a clear and concise method for funding the Part 12 capital cost share of the costs, administration could not recommend continued installation of sewers. The town could fall out of compliance with the ministry, and if they do, the ministry could issue a provincial officer's order to install the sewers and potentially stop development. So with respect to next steps, the town is going to consolidate feedback received from the public into a report for council. They will then report back to council on the issues and questions raised from the public feedback and public consultation. Council will then consider a bylaw under the Municipal Act, which will set out the total capital charges for each property as identified in the capital charge report. Staff and council may consider providing financing assistance to allow charges to be paid in installments as identified through the frequently asked questions provided on previous slides. So with respect to providing feedback, this can be provided to myself, and my email is provided on the screen, abs@watsonecon.ca, so abs, ABBS, @watsonecon.ca. I will compile all of the feedback and provide that feedback to town staff, who will then include that information into a final report to council. Thank you very much.